Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Buddhang dhammang sanghang namasami. So I've been invited to give a few Dhamma reflections to close out our evening together here. It's nice to hear that, by the way, from Rachel, who's just returned from many months of monastery life up at Birken Forest Monastery. Let's see, 8 months, almost 9 months. I thought I'd try to honor the request to talk a little bit about equanimity tonight. Give a few kind of thoughts or reflections around that. But maybe first off, just talk a little bit about dukkha. I kind of feel these days I should probably start every Dhamma talk I feel like I should start every Dhamma talk with dukkha, because you really just can't focus on it enough, in a sense. And for me, for quite a few years now, it's kind of this central organizing principle that I use to think about, contemplate, and make sense of the Buddha's teachings, and especially like what is he trying to get at. We're in the distinct disadvantage of living 2,600 years after the Buddha, and there's an enormous body of commentaries and practices and long-standing ways of interpreting what the Buddha meant, what is important and what isn't important. And in early Buddhism, it's fairly uncontroversial that the Four Noble Truths, and in particular the striving to understand dukkha in a profoundly transformative way and end that experience through a wise understanding of what the Buddha meant by dukkha, what it is that afflicts our lives, is the heart of the practice. Like I mentioned earlier, when we written into the monk's ordination ceremony is, please give me the going forth from the home life into the homeless life. You beseech your teacher, please ordain me for the sake of Nibbana. It's right there, sort of in the Pali words that you chant when you ordain. And Nibbana, besides being cool, is the cessation of dukkha, the complete and utter cessation of dukkha. So I'm going to talk about equanimity, but really I'm talking about the ending of dukkha. And so, when I read Dhamma, think about Dhamma, talk about Dhamma, this is something I encourage myself and others to try to come back to again and again, especially for those of you who've been practicing for many years and you got your podcasts and your books and you guys are just kind of like swimming in this stuff. It's really easy sometimes to lose sight of the forest through the trees and to get stuck on the trees and to lose that kind of bigger picture. And to me, that bigger picture really is dukkha, which we often translate as unsatisfactoriness or suffering. And so a question that's always alive in my mind is, how does this relate to dukkha and the ending of dukkha? How does this relate to understanding what the Buddha means by dukkha, and a transformative understanding of it, not just a superficial understanding of it. So, that's kind of my orientation. And, one way I think about dukkha in a very loose, contemplative way these days is kind of thinking about flow and being hung up. And the ultimate goal of my practice is sometimes something I think of is being consummate in being able to sort of flow with the experience of consciousness and in the human realm which I've been born into. And dukkha is getting hung up. So I think of myself as an aspiring log trying to float down the Columbia River. And how can I make my way to the ocean without getting hung up on all the various obstacles along the way? How can I not end up like one of those kind of rotting pieces of driftwood on the beach, kind of snagged in some old, decrepit, broken down set of piers that used to be a port or a dock. So I want to make it to the ocean. I want to flow. There's so many things in life that we get snagged and hung up on. And so I kind of liken this to the ultimate sort of goal of the practice. And I love bringing the emotion, the wise emotion of equanimity to mind, because it seems so integral to that sort of process. The way I think of it is, it's that state of flow, it's that freedom from being biased, being hung up. I often think about it in relationship to the Brahma Viharas, the divine abodes. These are the teachings on metta, karuna, mudita, upekkha. It's a set of 4 qualities of heart which the Buddha names the Brahma Vihara. Brahma is a god, or we sometimes translate it as a divine being, and a vihara is an abode. Goodwill, compassion, empathic or sympathetic joy, and equanimity. These are the places that divine beings dwell. And most of you know of these as meditation objects. But it's interesting in the suttas that the Buddha doesn't really talk very much about how to meditate on these things. And I'm not a scholar, this is just a reflection, but from my reflective readings of the suttas, more often than not, the Buddha just says, do this, be this. You shouldn't be a person of goodwill, you should be a person of compassion, you should be a person full of sympathetic, empathic joy, and you should be a person who relates to your own and others' experience with equanimity. And so, sometimes I like to contemplate when it shows up in the teachings like that. In some sense, it's kind of like an intention that we should sort of set, like to be and to speak and to act, and to move through the world with that sort of orientation. And there are many places where the Buddha's not just sort of saying, be that. He's saying relate to each other in that way as well. It comes up in many, many lists of how to be a good monk. how to be a good person. One doesn't just meditate on these things. Their speech and their actions are driven by those tendencies towards goodwill, compassion, empathic joy, and equanimity. And it's a little bit of a loose kind of translation. My favorite translation for metta, the first of these, is not loving kindness, which is the most popular one, but it's goodwill. But I think it is fair in some ways to liken these four Brahma Viharas, or divine emotions, to various states of love. Various states of very pure love. I would, not sort of clingy or romantic love, but a very kind of high and purified love. And in particular, when I think about the last of these, equanimity, the way that word is held, I guess, maybe in modern times, or the way many people tend to think about it, is a bit sort of flat. And so in particular, I like to think of this whole sort of set as different dimensions of love sometimes, kind of counters that tendency to feel or to worry that equanimity is somehow a kind of flat, maybe semi-apathetic kind of state of mind. And my feeling from my own practice is true equanimity is really far from that. It is warm and full. And these days, even when I sort of bring it to mind, it warms my heart to think of being equanimous. Like just thinking about spending a little time not being hung up. And kind of dwelling in this wisest of emotions, as the Buddha referred to it, as being a state of fullness. Ajahn Sudanto has this kind of image that he comes back to all the time in various kind of contexts in his teachings. He talks about striving to become a person with a cool head and a warm heart. And in some ways, I think the way I relate to this quality of equanimity and try to encourage myself to cultivate it encapsulates that sort of image. I've spent a lot of winters up meditating in Birken, and one of my favorite possessions when I go up there is Ajahn Sudanto gives me a feather duvet. And when it's 20 below, 30 below Celsius, nobody's your better friend. And then a big fluffy feather duvet. And at the end of the day, after you've been kind of meditating all day long and everything, you have your evening sit, and it's very dark in the winter there. They only have about 8 hours of sunlight. And you crunch back through the snow to your little lonely kuti in the forest, in the blackness of the Canadian wilderness. And you go into your kuti and you get ready for bed, and then when this happened to me so many nights too, I crawl into bed and then pull my duvet up over my head and just smile. And you've just been outside walking in this very crisp coolness, and oftentimes I even walk back without a hat, and you're laying there, and the second you pull that thing over you, it just radiates this warmth back into your body, this soft warmth. And the kuti they often give me there has a little skylight, and I have it cracked open so the cool air is kind of coming down through this skylight, and my head is cool, but the rest of my body, and most importantly my heart, is just fluffy and warm. And I think we need these kind of inspiring analogies and images sometimes. They can be very effective ways to orient ourselves and snap us out of the moments where we kind of lose it. And to me, this sort of idea of a cool head and warm heart, the reason why I liken it to equanimity is because equanimity is said to be the wisest of emotions. To maintain that sort of state of flow that I'm talking about, and not to get hung up, there really needs to be great understanding, great acceptance, great patience, great tolerance. Things that are most difficult to develop in our lives and generally take years, if not a lifetime, to cultivate to sort of high levels. And it's easy to be kind of cool and chill and not all worked up when conditions are kind of going our way. We have things as we like, and we're around the things that we like, the people we like. It's very challenging when we don't have those things. And the reality of a human life is that we don't really have the ability to kind of control our environment to the degree necessary to take refuge in that other strategy for finding a sense of profound well-being and happiness. And I also think about it in relationship to sort of human emotions, like, so much of the dukkha and so much of the suffering in our lives is the difficulties we have with other people. I guess the weather does provide a few challenges every now and then. And there are some physical challenges of life, but when I think about the real challenge of a human life and the bulk of the dukkha that I'll suffer in this lifetime, most of it is failures in my ability to relate to myself skillfully and other people sort of skillfully. And one of the greatest kind of lubricants in human relationships is understanding. So often the friction and the heaviness of any relationship difficulty we encounter has its seeds in some sort of misunderstanding or lack of understanding and clear seeing, even in a mundane way, not to speak of the more profound levels of wisdom and understanding that are often kind of lacking. And kind of echoing back to this loose reflection on the four Brahma Viharas as four dimensions of love. If you really want to listen to a monk talk about love, take it with a grain of salt. But for me, the most profound form of human love is one that is empowered by a deep kind of understanding of another person. Like for me, the most powerful love I've ever experienced is that love that comes from another person that I feel really sees me and really understands me. Lacking that, it just seems superficial. And I think of that in sort of relationship to the Brahma Vihara of equanimity. For it to sort of mature and to be something beyond a kind of superficial, like, oh, I shouldn't be kind of hung up about the stuff in my life, the election, the environment, the relationship problems, the very real problems of survival and trying to live your life and deal with the responsibilities and the situation you have. A huge, deep, wise kind of understanding of yourself and others and the world. Not just to like, it's okay, I'm not going to be hung up, but like a profound sense of it's okay. A profound sense of everything is fine. A profound sense of kind of understanding why things are the way they are. It's not just an acceptance of the way things are. It's empowered by a kind of profound understanding of causality and conditions and karma and how that all comes together in this moment for the world to be like this, the way it is. And it's the kind of empathy that's empowered by that. It's the kind of flow and open-hearted love that flows from that kind of seeing that I think of when I think of equanimity as brahmavihara. So there's a few other interesting kind of contemplations. And in the break I was chatting with Ajahn Karunadhammo a little bit, and he was talking about two types of equanimity. Was it limited and unlimited? Diversity and unity, which I'd never heard before. But I often think of two types of equanimity, and one I'll call mundane, which is so mundane, it's the one I was just talking about. So it's not really that mundane. But I like to call it, or think of it as mundane, because it's something that in the flow of our everyday life we can strive for and orient to in almost any sort of situation that we find ourselves. Whether it's driving in traffic or work or relationship problems or emotional stuff you're struggling with. It's like, you can recollect with mindfulness a determination or an aspiration to infuse that quality into your life. And it can have a very kind of positive effect, especially over time as we meditate on it, develop the path. You can do that in stronger and stronger sort of ways. But then there also is the quality of equanimity that I would call super mundane, because it's more connected with the culmination of samadhi or samatha, and also it's at the top of the 7 factors of awakening, which is when we were talking earlier and having these questions. We mentioned the 7 factors of awakening, and there's kind of even an interesting relationship between looking at the way the jhanas are talked about and defined in the suttas and the 7 factors of awakening. So the 7 factors of awakening have a sort of hierarchical structure, and at the base of them is sati, mindfulness. And I like how they talk about it in the commentaries, the enlightenment factor of mindfulness. Increasingly with mindfulness all over the place and secular forms of mindfulness, I like to talk about the enlightenment factor of mindfulness. This is not just bare awareness or being aware. This is the kind of mindfulness that fulfills the 7 factors of awakening, nibbana. This is the kind of mindfulness that will get you enlightened, not just aware. And that's at the base. And then comes dhammachanda, which is investigation of Dhamma, or I like to translate it as Dhammic curiosity. Harkening back to, I want to understand dukkha. I want to understand how I do dukkha. What is dukkha? And I want to understand it. I'm curious. I've been working on this for 20 years, and I think I understand dukkha. But you know what? I don't understand it like the Buddha did, because I haven't experienced the same transformation that his understanding of dukkha produced. And I tell myself that from time to time to kind of fire up that curiosity, like, yeah, you think you understand it? How come you're not enlightened? So, oh yeah. So I'm curious now, like, well, what is it that I don't yet really see in the noble truth of dukkha? And therefore I'm not released from its effects. So notice the energy that's there, and this kind of, and that curiosity, and then the next factor is virya, or energy. And it's the kind of energy you need when you're striving to accomplish or do something. It's not merely just sitting or practicing or being awake, the enlightenment factor of energy. It's the kind of energy that you will need to cultivate and need to use and practice and have when you're trying to accomplish something great and profound. And so, like, think of an Olympic athlete or something like this. It's like, if they're really going to win the gold medal, they have to cultivate a certain kind of energy in their day-to-day training and their practice and in their performance. And in the midst of their performance has to be this kind of bright sort of energy. And that's the third factor. Fourth factor, piti, joy, rapture, born of meditation. What is joy? It's not feeling happy. Joy is a profound physical experience, right? When we're sort of like in the midst of joy, it's a profound physical, emotional, mental experience that sweeps over the whole body. It's oftentimes translated as rapture, tranquility, the enlightenment factor of tranquility. Samadhi, which is the perfect unification of the mind. Classically, the 4 jhanas. So we have these. The enlightenment factor of mindfulness, this energetic Dhamma curiosity, the energy of the practitioner, the joy, rapture, tranquility, unification of the mind, supporting equanimity. And the reason why I bring this up for reflection as the top of this sort of list and spend some time kind of going through those is just to emphasize this sense of equanimity as something that the Buddha sort of placed on a very kind of high pedestal in a sense. There is a form of super mundane sort of equanimity that is the byproduct of very balanced, strong, profound practice and cultivation. And that's what I kind of reflect on as kind of super mundane sort of equanimity. And it also comes in the descriptions of the jhanas. So, we have the 4 jhanas, in the early suttas, and these are the various stages of unification of the mind, or sometimes I like to think of them as perfect states of meditation. And the principal way that these are identified and talked about in the suttas is with 5 sort of factors coming to maturity. And in the first stage of jhana, or unification of the mind, we have 5 factors of vitaka, vichara, piti, sukha, ekagata. And vitaka, vichara are oftentimes translated sort of as applied and sustained thought. But, sort of in this kind of reflection, sort of thinking, well, what's the relationship between these 5 and the bojjhangas? It's like there's a pretty deep overlap between the first 3 aspects of the bojjhangas. The establishment of mindfulness, that kind of Dhamma curiosity, and the energy component have a deep kind of overlapping or relationship to what's going on sort of in these first 2 sort of factors of jhana. The sort of applied and sustained sort of thought. And in this form, the hindrances of the mind, the psychic irritants, have been sort of weakened. So there's very profound sort of energy and mindfulness that is engaged with its object of meditation that we're talking about. We talk about these as jhana factors. And the next are piti passaddhi, or piti sukha actually, in the jhana factors. So it's the same word, piti, joy, rapture, is the 3rd of the jhana factors. And the 4th is sukha, which is happiness. Kind of like tranquility. So in some of the teachings and the commentaries, they say piti is kind of these piti sukha are joy and happiness, rapture and happiness, are very closely sort of related. And the piti is more physical, and the sukha, or the happiness, is more mental. A very close match to sort of what we find in the bojjhangas, with the sort of piti and then the tranquility, or the joy and the tranquility. And ekagata is one-pointedness, or unification of mind, the oneness of mind. And that maps very nicely with the 6 of the bojjhangas. Those 5 factors, when they've come to maturity, are said to characterize the first of the 4 jhanas. And if you march up through the definitions of the other jhanas, some of the lower ones kind of fall away because they're obstructing something that is even more deeply unified, deeply sublime. And the ultimate byproduct of the 4th jhana, or the perfection of the jhanas, is described as equanimity. So there's this kind of neat kind of overlapping between the kind of perfection that is available sort of in meditation and the very factors of enlightenment that the Buddha sort of talks about. These are challenging and difficult states to sort of know and attain to. Super mundane. There are a few places in the suttas where they're kind of sort of talked about in a common way, and the Buddha sort of says, no. These are special things. So, if you haven't experienced these things, you shouldn't be discouraged. But I like to reflect on these things because there is this higher form of equanimity, and too should be sort of reflected on and aspired to sort of in a very meditation practice. And I would say experienced in this lifetime. It is the high and the sublime form of equanimity. Completely cool, completely full with a powerful, powerful sense of life being completely unproblematic. So I'm going to offer that for your reflection tonight. A couple thoughts on equanimity.
May I